Good morning. I'm jet lagged because I got here, not yesterday, but the day before. What day is it today? That's about where I am. So I'm tickled to be coming first and talking first, and I'm happy to be here in Lisbon. I've never actually been to Portugal before. Beautiful, beautiful weather. Thank you for that. I'm going to do something different today. My area of expertise is digital governance, and so no one really knows what that is, and I have a new book out called Managing Chaos, and so it's largely about helping groups figure out decision-making in the digital space. So if you all work in the UX area, I'm sure you've experienced projects where you've recommended that certain things happen, and then an organization just can't get it done, right, because they're fighting and arguing about things all of the time. So I'm the one who comes in and helps them stop fighting and arguing about it. Sometimes people call me a web therapist, and sometimes it feels like therapy. I've had a CIO almost throw a chair out of a window once. I've had people quit. It can get to be a little bit hairy. So it gives me an interesting perspective, but I'm not actually going to talk about digital governance today. I am going to give a workshop tomorrow, so if you're really excited about that, you can come and see. But what I want to talk about is just some of the observations that I have because I work in this space and what I see about people who are working in the information age, right? So it's really interesting because if you think about what we're doing right now in the world, we're in the middle of the information age, right? The computer generation, there's data, everybody's talking about big data, a variety of different things, right? But are we actually architecting things? What are we really doing when we're thinking about doing that sort of thing? So what's really interesting about that whole experience to me is that we're actually making things. I went to a makers conference in San Francisco or somewhere last year, and I'm not a maker. I'm actually a management consultant. That's really boring. You guys are designers and all these exciting things, and I'm actually a management consultant, and I'm hanging out with you guys today, and I hang out with developers. But what I really see when I look out at all of you is this just sort of fearlessness in creating things. We have all these new tools and everything at our disposal that we want to work with, and there's just this sense of we're making things, and there's a tremendous amount of power and excitement behind that. We're designing things. Sometimes it's very tactically focused on something. Sometimes it's very broad. But there's a sort of fearlessness that comes with it and almost a brazen output. If I can make it, I will make it. And we're just making things and throwing them out and throwing them out. And so that reminds me of something else that we've done in history, which is in the industrial age, right? That's what we did. All of a sudden we had machines, we had steam power, we had all sorts of things, and people just started making stuff. And it didn't really end exactly the way that we wanted it to end. So we're looking back now at the industrial age and going, what were they thinking? They made all of this stuff. Were they not even thinking about what they were doing? Were they not thinking about the environment? It seemed obvious that, we were dirtying up the planet and doing a variety of different things, but what were they thinking? So when I think about the information age and us, information workers, knowledge workers, digital workers, whatever you want to call us, do you know what we're doing, or are we just making things, right, in the information age? So there's sort of three questions that I have around this space, and I'm not going to pretend that I know the answers, but I know you do. And you may not know that you do, and so I'd like to open a dialogue for my own sake. So this is going to be a very sort of selfish little meandering talk for me today, and at the end, I want you to help me answer the questions, and I'm sincere about that, because I think we know, and the real challenge is, if we don't know in the information age how we're going to architect these things, the full experience, who does know? And should we be taking responsibility for this? So we're working on our little project, and we're thinking about our little team and the little machine, information machine that we're making here, there, and everywhere else. But what about the bigger picture? Who's actually architecting the information age? And when we look back 100, 200 years from now, and they look at us, what are they going to say? Are they going to say, wow, how visionary? Or are they going to say, what were they thinking? So that's really the question. So This is the driest one, and this is the one that I spend the most of my time thinking about. This will tell you why when I go out on dinner dates, I often only have one. It doesn't repeat afterwards. It's not complicated, but the first question is, what do you do for a living? And I say digital governance, and then that's not very good. And then I start asking questions like this. In particular, like, can we actually create and distribute information products the same way we do things in the physical world? Right? So we have all kinds of interesting things, ways that we do things. And so I don't know how many of you all know a lot about supply chain management. Anybody know about supply chain management? Okay. Really? Nobody? Supply chain management. Oh, I see. Okay. I see some hands going up over there. So we're all the beneficiaries of supply chain management, particularly if you've got some device in your lap or you're holding it or you have a, what do you call this, a lanyard around your neck? Is that what you call that? A badge around your neck or that sort of thing. So really, supply chain management is about how do you get from the raw materials of things all the way through making things, distributing things so that it's in your hands, right? So in the 80s and in the 90s, there was a really big blast of supply chain management, particularly around laptop development, right? So it used to be that individual businesses just sort of crafted things and made things very sort of Apple style, right? And you just got it delivered. But this whole idea of disintegrating that process and optimizing at each level. So raw materials, where are they and how do I get them, right? Where are they globally and how do I get them and what distribution channels, what suppliers do I need, and optimizing that. And then actually making the parts that make up that laptop, right? How does that happen, right? And then actually pulling the thing together so that it is actually something that somebody might want to buy. And then you have to get that thing to the people who are actually going to sell it to folks, and then finally it gets delivered. And if you want to get really, really stretched out all the way to the end, you can go all the way and loop back in and say, well, what if they want to return it, or what if they want customer support? So that's supply chain management, and that's when we talk about hard goods all the time, right? And there's a lot of different ways to manage that. A lot of people with PhDs, a lot of people in business school talking about supply chain management all the time. And you can imagine, if you can optimize at each one of these phases, you can make things cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, right? And that's what tends to drive prices down, right? That's why Apple products can stay at a high price. They're not playing this game in the same way, right? So if we extend that and we think about information supply chain management, now believe it or not, that's a thing. The unfortunate thing is it's an academic thing that's happening inside universities, not with people who design things, but with people who are just very dryly thinking of it as information nuggets moving from here and there. So there's a lot of papers. Even Gartner has come out with something. And if you look at the sort of the CVs of the people who are writing them, these are not our friends. These are not people that we would hang out with. And they have a very, very dry sense of information. They're thinking about it primarily as if it's data, right? And that you're moving data around. They're not thinking about the experience that someone's having with the information. They're thinking about it as data in a database, right? So that's not really particularly helpful, but it's interesting. So if you'd like to go online and get these papers and read them at night before you go to bed, if you need a sleep aid, you're more than welcome to. They're very interesting to me. So can we do this? Information in the right format, in the right place, at the right time. Something you guys talk about all the time, right? But what does that really mean? For us, at least what I see when I'm working with people in the digital space in particular, is they have a very narrow sense of that. They're talking about an experience around a particular application or an experience around, you know, maybe a full set of websites or an experience for an entire organization, but they're not thinking broadly enough, the full global information set. So can we get information to the right place at the right time and in the right format? That's not that hard, right? Think about it. If we close the door right now, we may be missing some hyper-technical people, right? We could probably do this for a limited finite set, for something, for a particular use case. We could probably do this. But what about the whole thing, right? What about the whole thing globally? So if we go back and we look at this, what are these things for information, right? So what are the raw materials for information? Is it data? Is it a document? Is it a thought? Right? And how would you capture it? Like, what are the raw materials? And how would you optimize getting that information, right, into an information supply chain? And then, who's architecting this full experience? So we tend to start thinking about things around the thing phase in the digital space and then moving out to distribution. But we're really not as good at thinking about the raw materials and the parts that go along with that. And I know it because I work with groups all the time, and it's kind of like there's this real push to just pull it together and make something, right? And not a lot of attention paid to how it is pulled together and made, right? And where that information is coming from, and then the distribution of that information, and then later on the retirement of that information, or the recycling of artifacts of information. Like we hear in the news a lot about metadata, right? Because people's metadata is getting stolen, or people feel as if they're being spied on because of their metadata, right? So you hear a lot about metadata, but what about log files? What about the log file of events that happen? There's all sorts of artifacts that come out of information that can be recycled and optimized and are part of this big data. So the whole point of this in a business structure is to really make money off of things, right? If you're in a nonprofit or in higher education, you might say that it's not about it, but at the end of the day, it usually is all about money, because you're either trying to get donations, or you're trying to get, in the US, students to pay tuition, or more tax dollars, whatever the case may be. It really comes down to resources. And so that makes a lot of sense when you're thinking about the physical supply chain, right? Because it's gold that you're digging out of the ground, or it's dirt that you're moving around, or they're buildings that you're actually moving. But information is really different. And so I'll pull up this famous quote that I haven't heard a lot lately, but we heard about so much. There's this thing about information that's really, really different, right? Like, how do you monetize the thought in my head? How do you monetize what I'm saying right now, right? How do you monetize information, right? And how do you optimize for that? So this whole idea that information wants to be free, yet and the cost of delivering information going farther and farther down, yet at the same time, information becoming more and more valuable. What does that mean? That's sort of a dichotomy when you think about it. Information wants to be free, the cost of delivering information is going way down, but the value of information is going up, right? So that's a question that I don't know the answer to. If you do know how to reconcile those things, stop me in the hall and tell me, because I want to know. So here's one that's more near and dear to our heart. Who's actually going to be responsible or accountable for the outcomes that are related to information delivery, right? If we think about information as a delivery system, right? Who's going to be accountable for that? And yeah, we can talk about the experience and is it good UX? We can talk about security. I spend a lot of time with CIOs, and everything's always in the news all the time when there's a security breach, right? Everyone gets no one cares about it, and then there's a security breach, and then everybody runs around and scuttles, and then it all settles back down again. It's sort of like this blossoming, and then this settling down, and then this blossoming, and then this settling down, right? And occasionally something really terrible happens, and there's a huge violation, and then maybe there's some legislation or some law around it, right? And then there's the experience, there's access and accessibility. Who's actually accountable for all of that? Do you know? Because I'm not really sure. I work with really large global multinational organizations, and people don't really have a firm understanding when these things go wrong about who's accountable. Now, I don't really care. I'm not trying to slap a wrist or get someone in trouble, but it's an interesting question, because if we're going to actually intentionally architect these experiences, that's an accountability that belongs somewhere inside of the organization or somewhere in the world. Some things are easier. This has been floating around Twitter a lot, and I had to put it in because it's been floating around Twitter a lot, and I'm really not very Twittery, right? And I just can't move that fast. It might be my age. I can't keep up with this, so this is maybe like a 3-week-old Twitter thing that's been floating around. I think she was on, like, in the US at least, on the Google homepage. But anyhow, there's an accountability here that's clear, right? If the spaceship doesn't get there and the code was wrong, you can point to something that somebody wrote in that stack, right? For the information age and for experiences, if I have a bad experience online, right, or if I'm trying to do what I was trying to do before I left, which was renew the registration on my car, because I'm going to be in Europe for 5 weeks, and by the time I get back, my registration will have expired, and I go online, and I had the experience of not being able to find it, right, so that I could do my renewal online, which I should be able to do. Who's accountable for that? That I couldn't find the information, right? That's a small thing. As we'll see second, it can explode to be larger things as well. So is there a possible world, and please, I know this is a real website. I actually went to look for this, and I thought, wow, I wonder if there's a website about recalling products in the US. And there was, and it looked like that. So I'm sorry, but I'm wondering, is there a tab up there that says information? Would you recall information if it was bad, right? What happens and where does the accountability lie for that? So that's something that I think about a lot. When it's a physical good, it's pretty clear. If there's something wrong with the ignition of the car or an exhaust for the car, then there's a recall, right? There are consequences and it comes back. But what happens when there's a consequence related to a bad experience? Where does that go and where does it drive back into? So that's the other thing that I think about a lot. And then there's question 3, which is really, you can't get through one talk without talking about, and I know someone's going to talk about this directly at the end of the day, and I was excited about it, because everybody hates it when you say Internet of Things. That seems to be the thing to say this year, so I'm going to say it again. Internet of Things. Internet of Things. Internet of Things, right? So that's really cool. I'm sorry, I know it's the exciting thing. We are done some work with a very large chip manufacturer in California that's all about the Internet of Things. And I gotta tell you, there's just some cool stuff coming out. There's just like, the day has come where all of this technology and things are gonna come together. So this asks a really big question in my mind that I also don't know the answer to, which is, what happens when you put a hard good that has this solid information supply chain together with the internet, and what do you get? Right? Well, you get the Internet of Things, right? Which is really exciting, and hopefully that'll really work, and it'll all be good. But it can get kind of touchy. So I ran into this. This is a group of students from MIT that have come out with something really good, you know, baby monitors. My son's no longer a baby, he's 20 years old, but when he was a baby, we had a baby monitor. But it wasn't like that, right? It was just a little walkie-talkie that we put in a room, and then the other one was in the living room, and if he started crying, you could hear him. This one's kind of gone crazy. So where is this information? And if we think about the information supply chain and who's owning the information and who's handling the information on my baby, right? And who's accountable for that information and what's happening in this space, there's a lot of different things to consider. So you've got a baby, a human being, that's putting out information that's going into the internet, that's going into your smartphone, right? And so you have this kind of convergence of things that are happening. People are architecting and making these things, right? And I'm sure, maybe, that they're considering some ethical considerations about where the data goes. I was at a healthcare conference a month or so ago, and the other obvious things that folks talk about a lot are things like embedded heart monitors, right? That are married with other data that people are putting in and that their doctor are putting in, and they're making these medical outcomes. So there's a whole experience that's going on with how these things are being made. And do we have any sense at all of who's accountable for the integrity of that experience? Not just the quality from a perspective of, is someone delighted, right? Or can I find what I want? But really, the integrity of it. As we take things about ourselves and put it up into the cloud, intimate things about ourselves, who's actually going to be accountable for that? So that's something that I actually think about a lot because of that fearless creation that's going on in the information age right now. Everyone's making things and making things and making things. And we're very hyper-focused and we're very self-centered about it, right? We're not really considering the broader picture, the way we look back and go, well, of course, maybe we should have figured out a way to transport ourselves that didn't involve burning fossil fuels, right? There were a lot of different options of things that we could have done or heating our homes for burning things, but we just did them because we were focused and they were exciting at the time. So I'd venture to say that we're probably in a similar phase right now as it relates to the information age, where we can actually start to make real decisions. And I would argue also that there are probably people in this room that ought to be integral in making those decisions that are perhaps sitting back a little bit because we just think we're working on projects or working on an application or we're working on a site. We don't think of the fact that we're actually architecting an age and a way of being that we may have to live with for hundreds of years. So that's exciting, right? And it's sort of an honor to be able to do those things. So I'm going to try and answer my own questions. And then we're going to have questions and answers. And I sure hope you all don't leave me standing here by myself when I ask you to answer these same questions too. So answer to question 1, can we create and distribute information the same way? Can we have information supply chain? And I think if I have to give a yes or no answer, the answer, of course, usually is like maybe or sort of, or we can borrow things from it. I think the answer is probably no, right? And I think there's a lot of reasons why the answer is no. I've looked at the supply chain management and thought about information supply chain management, and there are some similarities to it, but information is really, really different because of its sort of intangible nature, and it's because it has flow, right? It has flow in the way a hard good doesn't. It's very transient. I just said something to you, right? And it either made you feel good or it didn't make you feel good, and you'll take that home with you, right? And that gets transferred in a way that hard goods maybe don't do in a similar way, or you make decisions based on information, which is really different than a hard good. So I think it's worth sort of opening it up and maybe considering some aspects of supply chain management. But supply chain management just has this sort of linear quality to it, right? It just goes out there. And we are operating in not just a World Wide Web, but in a web, like in a network sequence 3-dimensional world, right? So if you want to make a comparison, it's sort of like physical supply chain management is like Newtonian physics with an apple falling on your head, and what we're doing is like quantum, right? So there's just a really big difference between those two sorts of things, and so I think we need to think about that. Who's responsible for the outcomes? I think the answer to that is that we are, right? And so that's going to mean a lot of different things. I don't think anyone ever believes that they're that important, except for maybe sort of like psychopaths, right? So you tend to get in your job and you do what you're doing, and maybe you're proud of what you're doing and you understand what you're doing, but I don't think you understand how impactful you are. Just as I was saying, I said something to you. I could say something really mean and hurtful to you, and you'll carry it with you, right? And it may not have been my intention to do that, but it's still happening that way. So I think that a lot of us are doing a lot of different sorts of work, and we're maybe not intending to set the way things are happening for the next 200 years, for good or for bad, but that's actually what we're doing, right? And we may not think we have power because we're not the CEO of a company or at the top of the pile, but those aren't the people who make things, right? We're the people who make things. So I think we are the ones who are actually responsible for that. And we have a responsibility to actually move in that direction in a more comprehensive way. And so what happens when we bring together this hard and this soft, right? And to me, this is really the most exciting part of it, personally, which is anything. I think there's a huge opportunity for us. Anybody here like a big science fiction fan? That's all, really? Okay, I'm going to ask again. You don't have to be embarrassed. Big science fiction fan. Okay, more. That was really good. Okay, so I was binge watching Star Trek: The Next Generation before I came when I was packing, and it was really a lot of fun. So it was just my little geek moment. If anyone would like to talk about that, that's really cool, right? And so there is so much potential right now, I think, to sort of make things better in a lot of different ways. There are lots of different types of discriminating activity that goes on in the world that can really be rectified through the use of the World Wide Web and the use of the internet if we're actually intentional about it. The physical world has certain limitations that the internet and the World Wide Web do not have, right? And we can overcome those boundaries, and as we push those things together, there's a lot of really cool stuff that can happen. And I'm not just talking about baby monitors. I'm talking about, we do a lot of work inside the UN system, the use of mobile applications in crisis zone, right? So that people can, notify someone that, their village is being attacked or that a woman is being raped. And, there's lots of instances where you have bad things like that happening out in the world, and there's somebody 5 minutes away, but the information doesn't get there. So there's a lot of opportunities to really do intentional things where we push together the realities of the physical world and what's capable with information and good information flow. And so I think the answer to that is that anything can happen, but we get to decide what it is, right? And that's really my true message that I will bring to you all, is that we get to decide that. But I think that there's a certain level of maturity that has to come in to that we're not really owning all of the time. So I think the answer to that is we've got to do our best work, right? And so how many of you all feel like you're doing your best work? That wasn't supposed to be a trick question. How many of you all know what your best work should look like? Yeah, and how many of you all aren't doing that best work because you feel someone else is limiting you? Okay, so that's my specialty. That's not true. You can always do your best work, right? So that's just a challenge to get those sort of blinders off and to sort of get out from underneath that rock. You don't really have an opportunity like this that often to do your own work and to do your best work. And yes, I'm a mother, I have a child, I have to pay for things, I have a house to pay for. I have all those things that involve a job, right? But there's always ways that you can continue to try and do your best work, right? Everyone admires good work, everyone wants to see good work, and I think the world needs good work right now. So when we think about the power of the internet and we think about the power of digital and the World Wide Web, and you all as makers and experienced designers within that whole mechanism, we got to make this happen. I'm saying we as if I'm one of you. I'm not. I'm just a management consultant, right? So I can make those people that are trying to put a lid on you and keep you from doing your best work, I can maybe smack them around a little bit for you, right, as a management consultant, but you've got to do the work and you've got to be brave about it, right? And I think that's really important to know. And it's not everybody in this room, but even if it was just a few of you here or there doing something really brave, I think that could be good. So that's all I had to say to you. I think I've probably run out of time for the day. Thank you so much for listening to me ramble on and about. I hope that you guys have a really great rest of the day. I know I'm looking forward to the talks. And those of you who are staying for workshops tomorrow, were there yesterday, good luck and have fun.